Welcome to Men, Sex, and Tantra.
Discover what your parents, porn, and religion never taught you about being a man and having extraordinary sex. I'm Tanya.
And my name is Robert Schwenkler.
And get ready to have your mind blown and your world rocked.
All right.
Hey, everybody. We've had a little hiatus here from shooting, and we're back. And I think both of us are like, wait, what are we doing? But today we are talking about intimacy. We're talking about intimacy today because one of the things that I know after working with men for 30 years is that word can be really confusing. And not only can it be confusing because if a woman says, I want you to be more intimate, that doesn't really describe anything. Also is because intimacy is used as a replacement for the word sex. And I can tell you right now that when a woman says, I need or want or desire intimacy, she's not talking about the sex act. She's talking about intimacy, which can be part of the sex act and not be part of the sex act. But you had said something to me, Robert, when I first said, let's talk about this. You're like, intimacy. And you kind of looked up in the air like, don't feel that word.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about what's my relationship to that word and what does it mean to me? And it took me a moment. And as I sat with it, I'm just realizing it's not a word that I would tend to use by default for me in my experience of life. If I sit down and look at it more objectively, I'm like, yeah, I think that that's something that I actually have a really good grasp on and that I have a lot of in my life. It's just not a word that I would use. For me, a word that I would tend to use is just connection. And we can go a little bit more in depth into this in the conversation. But for me, connection then would get broken down into a bunch of different categories, just the same as can with intimacy, is sexual intimacy a thing that's worth looking at in and of itself? Yes. Is emotional intimacy a thing that's worth looking at in and of itself? Yes. And yeah. And for me, the word connection, like, do I feel connected to myself emotionally? Do I feel connected to myself sexually? Do I feel connected to her sexually? Is there sexual charge between us? Is there emotional like comfort and safety between us? And so I think all of this the two words connection and intimacy could easily be describing the same thing. Maybe there's other words out there as well that would more resonate for a particular guy listening to this as well. So I would offer to any guy who's listening and for whom neither the words connection nor intimacy totally resonate. If there's another one that resonates for you better, then you can just plug that one in every time we use another one. And then if none of them seem to resonate, that's a good clue that there might be something worth looking at here.
Right. Exactly. I have, in workshops, I've had men say, when I ask the question, what is intimacy? Their answers have been things like flowers, taking my time undressing her. It's ranged from all sorts of stuff, but the biggest thing was lack of clarity, like literally I'm not sure what that actually means. And most men thought that it meant more sex.
And I want to just point out something that I'm hearing in what you're saying there. Those answers, flowers, sex, going slower, there may be other things. All of those are like doing level. They're on the level of doing. If I do this thing, I think there's the implicit kind of association that, then I'll get a certain response. But they're all on the level of actions that I can take. And intimacy is kind of that, but it's also not that, because I could do all of the actions that look like intimacy, but I could not feel connected to myself or to the person that I'm engaging with.
I think that's powerful. Absolutely. I think that's powerful. So when you ask women what intimacy is too, here's where the confusion comes in. Most of them can't really answer that question either. So they'll say to their man, I just want to feel or be more intimate. And the guy's
Well,
like,
you
oh,
just answered it, that like you spoke to it perfectly. Like the answers that men give are on the level of doing. And before you even said it with women, I knew that you were going to use the word feel. The
yep,
answers you're giving for men are all about doing. The off the cuff, you use the word feel for women.
absolutely. So the woman is, yeah, that feel more intimate is translated to, oh, you want more sex or that. And that's not actually what they're saying. If most women, if they were to really be able to explain what it is, I think the word connection, but that again, that's kind of, what is that? Connection could mean physical proximity, right? So that word again is confusing and a little bit, not a little abstract. So the problem is that most people can't really answer that question, and women will throw out words that they want to men, and neither one of them are clear about what they're actually talking about. So what are things that are intimate? Well, when women think about intimacy, they think about sometimes the relationships they have with other women, the ability to be vulnerable in conversation. And almost every woman I know, if they've had a kind of conflict with their man, not a big blowout drag, but like a conflict, but then at the end of it, the man says something that's like, from his truth, from something that's vulnerable, and that's the key word right there. He says something vulnerable, something that he doesn't usually say. He's at that point feeling like, oh my God, this is like he just needs a break. He usually needs to go away. The woman at that moment wants to have sex. When the man feels that he's most vulnerable and probably least interested a lot of the time, when it comes to it that way, not when it comes consciously, but when it's comes through a conflict or an argument or something that breaks down where they actually have a moment where there's some vulnerability, the woman all of a sudden feels intimacy towards her man. He has given her a piece of him, a glimpse of him that he normally doesn't. And in that moment, she's feeling really turned on because she feels like there's that exposure. So for a lot of women, that exposure, that vulnerable exposure, is what they're talking about when they're like, I just need more intimacy. And so,
And a guy in that state is pretty much the exact opposite
right,
thing of a
right.
guy who's up here trying to figure out what to do. And this is a whole new just paradigm for a lot of, and for women also. There's a lot of
Yeah,
women who are just stuck up in the upper half of their body and don't have connection to their feeling bodies. But
yeah,
certainly for men, as you're talking about it, the word that I would use is that the woman just wants to feel him. She wants to, and it's kind of abstract. It's like, well, what does that actually
yeah,
mean? But you're giving a good picture of it. It can be that moment where he finally exposes a deeper part of himself that he normally doesn't, because maybe he's
right,
up in his head, or
right.
he's, not checked into his body fully.
And then what she feels from that moment, let's use the word exposure, because I really think that's a really, he has exposed himself in a way that he may not out in the world, may not have ever with her. What also that tells her is that he trusts her. That's what she's projecting. Now, he may just have exposed himself and is thinking, holy crap, I gotta exit stage left and get the fuck out of here because this is too not okay. But in that moment, that's what she's feeling, is like, oh, he trusts me to expose himself to me. And now I feel close and I feel felt and I feel him. And now I want to have sex. And it's, like you said, most men are not feeling that way in that moment.
Well, and I want to add to that, it not just indicates that he trusts her. What I'm about to say for me is really at the essence of all of this. It says that he trusts himself, that here's a man who's solid enough to, and let's not mince words, he's just being honest.
Yeah,
All of the other bullshit that's always going on, the layers above that keep him feeling disconnected from her. We use the word vulnerability and exposure, whatever other kinds of words, and there can be, I think there's definitely guys out there who experience the word vulnerability as a good thing, but there are contexts where vulnerability is seen as a negative
Right.
thing. You know what? A trait or a way of being that pretty much everybody across the board can agree is good is being honest and being truthful. And for me, that's a really simple way to bottom line what vulnerability is. I'm just being honest with what's actually going on inside of me. And when I'm secure enough in myself and grounded enough in myself that I'm not worried about, oh, what are they going to think of me? Or am I going to get it? Like all of that is insecurity.
Right.
Insecurity is not sexy.
Right.
What's sexy is a man who trusts himself, who's grounded in his truth, and who's able to, show up trusting himself enough to
Right.
give his honest self to her.
Yeah. Now, and that's the reality of the matter. Though most of this happens in a projection experience, which is also why safety is so elusive. Because I know tons of men who've said, I was vulnerable, honest about how I really felt, and then she emasculated me with it. Then she went after me with it. Then she used it against me at some point. And so there is that margin of, women are saying, I want this. I want you to be intimate. I want you to be vulnerable. I want you to expose yourself. Really, intimacy, expose yourself to me fully. And then they won't necessarily honor that, or they can sabotage that too. So you do that trust in yourself, 100%. You have to have it if you're exposing yourself to anybody emotionally or vulnerably, because you can't guarantee. Nobody guarantees how somebody reacts when you show up in that vulnerable honesty. And I'm using the word vulnerable honesty because a lot of people think they're being honest when they're actually being triggered.
I was just like dumping on somebody.
Yeah, venting, their trauma's coming out and they're like, okay, let me tell you what a blah, blah, blah. That's not really honest.
Yeah, there's a layer underneath of that, which is usually something like, I'm hurt, I'm scared.
Right. And yeah, in fact, if you just simply say, I feel, and then talk about your feeling, right there is your first level, intimacy level 1. If you're speaking to a woman and you say, I feel, she already feels like you're being more intimate.
But I want to go back and talk for a moment about what you're saying about the experience of a guy who opens up and then it kind of gets used back against him. There's another element of trusting one's self in there. Yes, there's trusting oneself enough to open up. There's also trusting oneself to make decisions that are healthy for you. If you're in a relationship with somebody who's abusing you or misusing your vulnerability, and I know that the realities of houses and kids and like this is not always as cut and dry, but on some level it is really cut and dry, which is that if you're being honest with somebody and they're not honoring that, then what also means that you trust yourself is that you get out of the relationship and you go find one that is going to honor who you are.
Or you get help.
Or you do what it takes to change the situation so that your vulnerability is being received and honored.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because sometimes it is true that if a woman is insecure herself and she's saying, I just want this intimacy, I just want you to be this and show yourself and, this kind of things. And then she doesn't know what to do with that, and that happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden she doesn't know what to do with that. Okay, now you're both acting from places that may or may not be healthy. And so sometimes it needs a good conversation. And part of being honest is like, look, I just gave you intimacy, my honesty, me showing up, talking about how I feel. And now you're using that in a way that it's hurtful. That's also intimacy.
Yep.
I feel this from that interaction.
And I had a mini version of that just the other night with my woman, and she's generally amazing. What were we even talking about? I gave her, we have hard water where we're at, and her hair doesn't turn out as smooth and silky as she wants it. And that's been a minor complaint of hers living where we're living right now. And we were chatting about it the other night, and I was like, I haven't researched it at all, but I wonder if there are products that just help with that, certain kind of shampoo or something that ends up making the hard water just not
Right.
be as wacky to her hair, that leaves it in better shape. And what did she say? She made some kind of return comment, kind of putting me down for having a stupid idea or something like that.
Yeah.
That was how I took it.
Right.
And there was some, she didn't say it like that, but there was some kind of that energy of that. And it hurt me. It hurt me a little bit in the moment. And I was kind of present to it. And I said something to the effect of, well, I'm just trying to help. And then a little bit later, we're laying in bed a half hour later or whatever. And I was feeling a little bit closed. And I said, I'm feeling closed, a little bit closed from that moment. And she I forget, she replied like, oh yeah, something like that. And I said, yeah, what did I say? It feels crappy to be put down when I'm just trying to be helpful.
Mm.
And I was just really clear about what happened and how it felt. And I could tell that she totally received it, and that there was a little, because I trusted myself to be clear. I wasn't trying to be a dick. I wasn't trying to say,
Well, you didn't say you.
why I didn't say, why the fuck did you do that? Or
Right.
that was shitty of you or whatever. Yeah. I said, it feels shitty I think I may have said it that way. It feels shitty to be put down when I'm just trying to help.
Right.
Or maybe,
So that was all you talking about your feelings versus you saying you are.
so I wasn't putting it on her
Yeah.
or like pointing my finger at her, but I
Yeah.
also wasn't holding back. I was like, that felt shitty.
Yeah, absolutely. And that
And
is intimacy right there.
yeah, yeah. It's intimacy. And I noticed that because I felt disconnected from her. I felt a little bit closed to her, and I want to feel open to her.
Yeah.
And so these are words that instead of intimacy,
Yeah.
connectedness, openness, closedness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that absolutely. And by the way, there's both. Yes, there are products. And I know about this, having had a hair salon forever.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's a small example of how things go awry with couples, and that idea of, when a woman says she wants to feel intimacy, she's talking about that openness, not feeling closed off, feeling part of. And what you were saying there is beautiful, because what you're saying is like, oh, that small thing, which certainly isn't a huge deal, but you felt closed. And so you were like, hey, I want to repair that. And how I repair that is talk about how I felt. And then hopefully she can receive that and is like, oh no, I can hear you with that, whatever it is that she does that helps to repair that openness, that open container that you want to feel.
Yeah. And there's a really good distinction that we're finding in here for the person who's asking themselves, well, how do I get or create more intimacy? It's going in and finding the places where you feel closed, figuring out why you feel closed, and doing what it takes to resolve that and repair that. And sometimes it may have to do with the person that you're with. If you've been with them for a while, every person or couple that I've ever worked with, the reason that relationships go downhill is the big blowout things, maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's always death by a million cuts. There's
absolutely
a thousand things that nobody spoke about, or somebody spoke about, but they didn't do it skillfully, or for whatever reason, they couldn't resolve it. And finding that intimacy again means, again, just being honest. If I feel closed and that hurt, that's me being honest.
right.
If she says she wants to feel me more or wants more intimacy, and I'm confused about what that means, I'm confused about what that means is me being honest.
Absolutely. And then you find out that she's actually confused about what that means too. She just knows she's longing for something, and it's something different than just physical sex, if we're talking about sex and intimacy, or just hanging out watching TV. Like, she feels lonely. Women feel lonely when they don't feel that connection, that ability to have be exposed, and both for both sides.
Yeah. And one of the traps that I think a lot of couples fall into also is that the woman kind of expects him to basically be her girlfriend,
Yeah.
which can also be an intimacy killer. Also, if she just wants to chit chat all the time and, oh, my day was this and blah, 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 and go on for an hour, that kills intimacy also. So there's work for her to do there. And there could be work for the man to do to guide her in that direction, to again, be honest and say, I love you. And I want to create more polarity, more spark in our relationship. And I want to hear about you and know you. And at the same time, I want you to find resources that are going to be good for you to get this need met so that we can have, you don't want to go fuck your girlfriends, so you can go do that thing over here and get that chit chat out and get your needs met there so we can have a hotter relationship over here.
Yeah.
And focus on that thing that only we can do.
Absolutely. There's a lot of confusion out there, and a lot of people doing things to relationships that slam them. And 7 years, it usually takes people 7 years before they get help if they're in a couple. 7 years of those little teeny things that constantly create trauma and drama and problems. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So let's say to everybody, if you're in a couple right now and you're having all these things, you should get help. Get help sooner. Yeah. Don't wait. It's easier to correct things when they're small, and there aren't a million of them.
Yeah. And I was going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Polarity is related, but a separate conversation in certain ways. But yeah, and I would say for the guy listening who wants to be sent away with something more actionable to do here, I think one of the first things that you're going to need to do is actually tune in and get clear on what intimacy means to you. And not just what intimacy means to you, but within that, what do you need? What do you want? What's important to you to have in your relationship, whether you're in one now or you want to be in one? You got to be clear on that.
Yeah. And just know that most women, when they say intimacy and they want to feel connected, especially you might hear this when women are talking about they're not in the mood for sex, or you're not getting as much sex as you want. Usually women are saying they don't feel connected. They don't feel connected beyond sex. So they're not talking about sex when they're talking about intimacy or feeling connected. Usually for women to crave more sex, they want to feel this feeling of intimacy, this thing that they know that if you're able to be honest and vulnerable, she's able to be honest and vulnerable. And when you're both able to do that, that takes everybody out of their heads more and into their bodies, which means that sex is more interesting and better.
Yeah. And how do I do that? Well, these are the kinds of practices that both you and I do in distinct ways. And then in our men's course,
absolutely,
we give practices that help men come back into their bodies and develop that deeper relationship with themselves. Because if you can't do it with yourself, then how are you supposed to do it with anybody else?
Right. Right. So no, it's not flowers. It's not unzipping your pants slower. It's not even, I mean, sometimes it can be touching her more slowly, but ultimately if you're still emotionally and energetically unavailable, it's none of the tactics or doing level things are gonna get either of you what you want. Yeah, it's emotional feeling. That's what we're talking about right there.
Yeah.
All right. Let us know your questions. Maybe we need to refine this more, talk more about this, talk more about that. We'd love to hear from you. And I think we've been intimate enough.
Have a good day.